questions to Graham?
Well, hold
Yeah.
on. Can I just, I'm going to just get a few things out of the way. Just welcome everybody. I know people are starting to trickle in now. This is Liz and Craig of Remoting and Beyond. You can find us at remotingandbeyond@gmail.com. Can you mute Danny, please? Yeah, can you mute her? Thank you. So anyway, so today we are welcoming. Can you mute her, Craig, please? Because Graham's gone. Thank you. He'll be back. So today we are welcoming Graham Nicholls. We're going to talk about what we know is astral projection, but Graham has already told us that he prefers it to be called an outer body experience. And as a psychic medium, I get asked a lot about astral projection, outer body experiences. It is not something I am personally comfortable with. So therefore, I wanted to bring Graham on the show because Graham, you do courses, you've written books, and we want to know everything about you. So please, Graham, if you would you let us know how you got into this and tell us all about it?
Okay. That's a big question, but I'll do my best. Well, it started with me even before out-of-body experiences or astral projection. It started with me when I was around 5 years old, and I had what I would probably call a visionary or a apparition experience. I was a little kid, 5 years old, got out of bed in the middle of the night, walked into the hallway of the flat I grew up in London, and I saw a tall figure, very unusual looking, not like a normal person at all, almost wearing, it's very hard to describe, but very unusual kind of clothing, almost like feathers or rags, or, you know, my memory is quite vague now after all these years, but something along those lines. And it kind of stood there and kind of looked at me. And obviously that was pretty scary for me as a small child. Can you still hear me?
Yes. So that's very interesting to me that was in London. Just quickly, Graham, I used to work for the police in London, and we used to get calls from this Airbnb, from this B&B in Hendon, and it was always, there's a strange man standing in my room, and we're like, yeah, that's the ghost, you're in room number 3. So anyway, yes, please carry on.
Okay, so I saw this apparition. I remember as a little kid being very scared by the sight of it, and I remember going down onto the ground and trying to sort of, I think it was an attempt to get some kind of stability or solidity by like going onto ground level. And I remember trying to call out to my parents, who their room was just behind where I was, but I couldn't scream. I was too scared, basically. So that was pretty much the first thing that happened. And then I had sort of interesting perceptions, maybe something akin to past life perceptions or things like that. I don't really know, because unfortunately I didn't record it as a child, but I had interesting perceptions anyway when I was in primary school, was a small kid. And then at 12 years old, this is when it kind of really started happening in terms of the out-of-body experiences, that I was laying on my bed one evening after school, was just laying on my bed, relaxing, not sleeping, not really doing anything, just laying there. And suddenly I just felt this shift in my consciousness, and the next thing I knew, I was floating a few feet above the ground, so in a vertical position, almost like I was standing in midair. I found myself above the ground, but maybe something like 500 meters from where I lived. I recognized where I was. The environment looked familiar. It was close to where I was going to school, but I was just floating there, and obviously this was a pretty strange experience. And then it only lasted a matter of seconds, and then I was back in my physical body again. I had no reference point for it. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how to explain it. I just didn't know what it was. And it happened a few times. I don't really recall how many times, but it happened a few times during that period. And then I remember around a year and a half later, I came across some writing about it, or maybe on a TV show. I don't really remember where I saw the reference, but I basically learned the term out of body experience. And I went basically to a bookshop near where I lived to try and find a book on the topic, to try and learn something about it. This is at like about 13 and a half. And I found a book on the topic by a parapsychologist called Janet Lee Mitchell. It's still a pretty nice little book. It's called Out of Body Experiences, a Handbook. So I bought that and then read that, and that was really the beginning. Then I put all my effort. I basically made a commitment that I would spend a year trying to learn to do it, to induce the experiences myself. And I made this quite serious commitment that I was going to work on it and I was going to learn to do it. So every single night, and I did do it absolutely every single night, I was really disciplined on it. I don't know where this discipline to focus on it came from, because I wasn't that passionate about a lot of other things, but for some reason this really motivated me. And so I spent the next 6 months, it took me, doing it every single night, using a very, very basic technique of imagining I was floating on clouds. That was pretty much all there was to the technique. There are far better techniques now that I know and teach, but at the time that was all I had. So I used it, and
Can
eventually.
can I just ask you just a couple of things there, because that's quite amazing, Graham. The fact that you were so young and yet you went on this pursuit of outer body experiences, because I know from my own personal experience, and also I roam around the psychic circles in London, at the spiritualist churches when I'm there. I usually spend every summer in London, unfortunately not last year or this year, but we all agree that when we're teenagers, we're still trying to fit in with the crowd. And so the fact that you pursued this, it must have been very alienating for you. It was something that you were doing that you probably didn't discuss with anyone. I mean, can you elaborate on that, how you felt about that?
I'm not sure I was ever hugely a person that fitted in anyway. I've always been very much someone who's walked my own path, and I've always lived quite an unconventional life. So even back then, I wasn't like a complete outcast kind of person, but I was definitely not that worried about what my peers thought. Um, I saw through a lot of peer pressure from quite a young age. When a lot of my friends were starting smoking, for example, I just saw it as an attempt to appear more attractive, or to, you know,
Yeah.
or that they were being suckered by marketing and
Yeah.
things like this. So I had this perception of sort of seeing through that kind of thing from quite early on. So I never got sucked into a lot of the things that maybe a
Mm,
lot of teenagers do. And I
mm,
was just far more interested in working on things like that. So, and I
mm,
did talk to my friends about it. I was quite open about it. I didn't see any reason to sort of hide it or anything
mm.
like that, really. So
Okay.
I did tell most of them. Some people became a bit fearful of it, and other
Mm.
people were more open to it. So, but yeah.
That's really strange. You must have had a very good group of friends, because in most of that sort of area as teenagers, I mean, I see it with my son now. I don't know if he's on here yet, but I see it with my son now. He is extremely psychic, but he calls me, and I've said this before, he calls me creepy witch mommy, and it's not something he talks about. It's not something he wants to acknowledge. He's still trying to fit in with a crowd. He hasn't carved out his own identity. So the fact that you did that from, it sounds like from birth, really, is very amazing. And that's why you've come so far today, I believe, because you've dismissed all of that peer pressure.
Yeah, well, thank you. But yeah, I like to kind of I guess focus on the things that I think are more authentic and more important than a lot of what society focuses on, I guess, in general. You know, I've never drunk, never smoked. I got rid of my TV. You know, I kind of I tried to live. I'm vegan. I try to live like a more ecological, kind of balanced life. I try not to buy things from sweatshops, and you know, I try to live in a way that's very engaged with sort of positive values, I guess.
And those positive values, I completely understand where you're coming from. You know, the TV is mind control as we know it. I mean, there's not a lot of value in watching TV anymore. I mean, maybe back in the day when I was a kid, when we didn't have 24-hour TV, and I mean, there's not a lot of value there. So that's, you know, the vegan lifestyle. I even notice when I eat healthy, that my psychic abilities are much more intense. So there is something to that. It is, when you radiate positivity, positivity comes back, and it does enhance your abilities. Now, I personally, Graham, and you can disagree with me, but I feel like you're a bit of a medium.
Possibly. It depends
You
what you
are.
define medium as, I guess.
Well, making contact with the spirit world and being able to channel through your third eye. I mean, I feel like you can channel. Definitely.
I do work with those things. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
I don't work in a way that I would maybe label mediumship in the sense that some mediums I know do it, for example. But I do work with those kinds of things. Yeah, for sure.
Great. Great. So as a teenager, you really started getting into it, and you set yourself this goal of doing it every night. And how long did that go on for?
It took 6 months before I finally achieved an intentional out of body experience. So it was essentially at the point I was about to give up. And basically, I think because I was feeling like I wasn't getting anywhere with it, it was at that point that I think I let go. I think I had the term astral projection in my head very strongly, and I think the word projection suggested to me that it was a very kind of, well, like the word suggests, you know, that you're sort of pushing something out, or you're projecting something. And I also had these concepts of doing it at will, which you hear a lot. So those two terms I think are quite unhelpful. I don't think anyone really does it at will. I've spoken to other OBE authors and sort of asked them, you know, when you say at will, do you mean like you could do it now, like sitting in a restaurant or walking down a street? Or, and they say, well, no, you know, when I'm in the right mindset. So, and when you sort of break it down, it really, what they really mean is they can induce an out of body experience when they're in the right conditions and the right frame of mind, etc. There's a set of criteria needed in order to induce it. So I think that's a more helpful way of looking at it. So basically, what happened is I let go, and I think when I let go, it allowed the experience to happen. So instead of me trying to will it or force it or project it, it was simply actually it happened when I let go and relaxed and allowed the experience to unfold. So and then I felt this huge surge of energy go through me. It felt something akin to a lightning bolt going through my body, but no pain, nothing negative. It was just this huge surge of energy. And then when I sort of came to my senses and was aware again of what had just happened, I realized I was looking down at my body and I could see my body laying on the bed. It was a much more classic out of body experience, unlike the ones that I'd had when I was 12. And
Mm.
I
Can
could
I just
only
ask you, can I ask you,
fine.
when you had that real like first experience and you're looking down at your body, did you have any connection to your body at that point? Could you still feel your body at all? I mean, what did that feel like?
It No, it felt like I was looking at a photograph. That's the best
Mm.
way I can describe it. So the outward appearance I recognized as me, the same way you would if you looked at a photograph, but you don't look at a photograph and think that's me. You think
Mm.
it's an image of me, it's an impression of me. um and that's kind of how it was. It did also seem quite grayed out, my sort of physical body. It looked almost slightly black and white, and there was a kind of bluish greenish tint
Mm.
to the environment. I don't know whether that was moonlight coming through the window or whether
No.
that was actually energy, but yeah,
that
it's
that's interesting, and I'll tell you why that's interesting to me. But when I first started out really doing mediumship, I mean, I was never trained as a medium, right? I'm a fourth generation, minimum fourth generation psychic medium. I just started doing readings one day. I never grounded, I never protected myself, and I learned the hard way, right? Because that's really bad. And I was lying in bed one night, and the same thing happened. I didn't intend for it to happen. I was closing my eyes to go to sleep, and suddenly I was hovering over the top of my body, but it felt exactly as you have just described. It's like you're looking at a black and white, almost grayish photograph. Now, there are no windows in my bedroom because we live in an energy saver home. And so I can't say that it was the moonlight, but there was that grayish, bluish tint, almost like a green tint. It's a color that you don't see very often. It's almost like static in a way. But what I actually felt was, I felt like, oh, I've just left my sack of bones behind. It made me feel very uncomfortable. I did not like the feeling, the energetic feeling there. And I quickly jumped back into my body. It was quite a frightening experience for me, but it's just as you described, Graham. So that's probably, routine, or, I don't know why that is. But that's a very interesting question. And maybe I should do a session to find out why there is that, like black and white, gray, and then those colors involved. That's very interesting. Thank you.
well, actually, I think that there's actually a sort of there are certain frequency patterns, or I think it's probably to do with the visible light spectrum. I think
Mm.
it's a lot to do with our perceptions of the experience and the level that we're on. In that, in later experiences, like my most powerful out of body experience that happened in '99 was a precognitive out of body experience where I was in a room with 4 other people and saw the Soho bombing that happened in London at the time. And I saw it 5 days before it happened and described all the details to the 4 other people in the room
Oh
for those
yeah.
5 days before it happened.
Wow. The is that the bombing where they hit the I was there. Was that the bombing where they hit the gay bars, or the gay, what was the
Yes.
name? Yeah. Okay. Wow. Okay. And that's amazing. So describe that to us, Graham, because I was there and I actually joined all the protests. You remember the protest marches afterwards, and hate will not be tolerated. There were millions and millions of people marching over that bomb. So tell us, like, can you describe to us exactly what happened and how you saw it? Like, did you see yourself moving on a timeline? How did that go for you?
Well, that particular experience, it started off. I was teaching 4 of my friends the G technique, which I just developed at the time, which is one of the techniques that I use, which is a sort of works with your physicality in order to get you to the right state for an out of body experience. Because a lot of techniques basically ignore your physiology. when it comes to inducing OBEs. But I think we need to work with the whole complete system of who we are, if you like. But anyway, so I was teaching this method, and when I was sort of going through it afterwards, when I was trying to kind of work with it afterwards, nothing really seemed to be happening. It sort of felt like it wasn't working almost. And almost as soon as I thought that, this sort of shift happened in me. I felt this sort of energy overcome me, and I went down to the ground, because I would have fallen over otherwise. So I went down onto the ground, and as soon as I was laying on the ground, I went into an out-of-body experience. Initially, I was in a sort of tropical looking environment. It was very forest like. It was kind of there was like a stream, there was trees, it was, you know, lots of light. It was quite a beautiful place. But then suddenly that seemed to split, and I found myself standing on the corner of Moore Street and Old Compton Street about 150 meters or so from the Admiral Duncan pub, which is where the bombing was.
That's right. Yes, the Admiral Duncan, of course. Yeah.
So I looked to my right, and I saw what was then the Polo Bar, which was like an Italian restaurant, and I you know, could recognize my surroundings because I obviously knew the area well. And then I saw the explosion burst out from the pub 150 meters away. And then I saw the kind of chaos ensue, and I saw a person run by me on the right hand side. I was very like rooted to the spot. I wasn't floating, I wasn't flying or anything like that. I was just rooted there, like watching what was unfolding. And then at the same time, everything was this bluish gray again. So there was this sort of quality to it, which seems to be present when I have very accurate experiences. So I've also had other veridical or objectively accurate out of body experiences that had this blue gray quality. So yeah, I saw the whole thing unfold, and then I felt this energetic kind of emotional wave hit me in the chest. It almost felt like the emotions and the pain and the outpouring that had happened from the people who were in the pub. It seemed to sort of hit me in the chest, and that took me out of the experience. And I then found myself back in the room, the workshop space where I was teaching the technique. But I wasn't fully conscious yet. I was kind of in this situation where I was still in a kind of trance state. And other people, the other four people in the room had noticed that something intense, something powerful was happening with me. So one of them in particular, a guy called Chris and another guy called Lawrence, they were sort of coaxing me out of this trance state and sort of bringing me back to more like normal consciousness. So that was the whole kind of process. And then we sat in a circle and I told them exactly what I'd seen. And 5 days later, the actual bombing happened.
How did you feel when the actual bombing happened? How did that make you feel?
I suppose my first reaction was sort of confusion, I guess, because I wasn't even sure. I didn't even really believe in the idea of precognition. At that time, it seemed I couldn't get my head around how such a thing could be possible. So I was, I guess, confused by it and was trying to work out how this could fit into my worldview. I think that was the initial reaction.
Yes, I should imagine it took you a while to actually absorb that you witnessed that. That's interesting. That is extremely interesting because, and I'll tell you why. It's funny that you saw that. This is why I say you're a bit of a medium as well, because when I work on criminal homicide cases, it's almost like you're watching a movie, but I don't physically leave my body, as in I think I travel. What happens is the spirit, the victim in the crime actually pulls me over to the crime scene. So I actually move back in time to the crime scene. And it's like I'm standing there from afar. It feels like I'm on a movie set, but it's not that color. Everything's in full color. And it's like you're watching it. And then once the event takes place, you then suddenly are pulled back out, and you're able to so in that instance I catalog all the descriptions of the suspects, what actually happened. So I mean, it sounds very similar to, in a way, what I do, but I don't actually leave my body, and I don't know how I do it. So I'm sure I get lots of questions about, the techniques, but I actually don't know. So, but with you physically left your body and you saw it in that realm. And did it look like a movie to you? Did it feel like you were standing on a movie set?
No, I wouldn't say so. It
Okay.
felt like I was standing there, but everything just had this kind of unusual hue to it. Everything was this blue gray kind of color. But other than that, other than the coloring, it basically felt like I was standing there. But there was a different quality to it. That was maybe what was interesting, that it like in a lot of my out of body experiences, I will feel like I'm physically there, but other than that, other than the fact that I can sort of float and things like that, it does feel very much like a normal, inverted commas, normal experience. But this had some difference in the feeling of it, but it's very hard to explain. It's a very subtle difference, but I would recognize it as maybe a quality that's present in precognitive experiences.
It is. It sounds.
So can I hop in with a question, please?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So after the bombing happened and you realised that you had actually seen it before, what emotional effect did that have on you? Because I can imagine if you had seen it before, then realised it was real what you saw, it might have emotionally affected you in quite a significant way.
Yeah, like I said, I think sort of confusion was the first emotion, and then I think it sort of sent me on this journey to do with the violence and I guess the hate and all of that, of why someone would act in that way, why they would do that. And I think that on a sort of spiritual level and an emotional level kind of sent me on a journey thinking about that a lot more. And I think that led me into thinking a lot more about non-violence, and I read a lot about ahimsa, and which is the sort of Hindu idea of non-violence, also Jain idea. And I looked into Jainism a lot. I looked into Marshall Rosenberg, non-violent communication. I looked into the writings of Leo Tolstoy, because he was a vegetarian and anarchist, and also focused heavily on non-violence. And I think really War and Peace and some of these classic writings that he put out were really a way of exploring a lot of those ideas. So yeah, it sort of made me think about all of those things, and also think about the violence and the problems that I'd seen growing up in London, coming from a very working class background as well, growing up in a housing estate, which is, for those who don't know, basically like the poorest place you can grow up in the UK, kind of thing.
What area did you grow up in, Graham?
I grew up in a few places, but so I was mainly in quite central, so around kind of Paddington, but then also around Dalston. I spent a lot of my teenage years and that area. So yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. And what else is interesting is the fact that you know, because I knew that area very well, simply because I worked across the street. I worked on Conduit Street, if you know where that is, just off Savile Row. Yeah, near the Windmill Pub, if you remember that tiny little pub.
I do.
So we, yeah, exactly. So we used to all, you know, go for lunch, and we'd walk over to Soho because we love this vegetarian. So I know that area very well. There was a vegan restaurant over there that we used to go to. And a lot of the people that I worked with were gay and lesbian. So we always were in Soho all the time. I mean, you don't have to be gay or lesbian to be in Soho, of course, but it's a predominantly gay and lesbian area. And that's why, for those of you who do not know, the Admiral Duncan was a gay and lesbian, or was it just gay? It was a gay pub.
The area is more gay men, I would say. So
yeah,
I mean, there are some sort of more inclusive, I guess, and lesbian spaces, but it's mainly gay men.
Yes, so I mean, you know, so this pub was targeted as a plot against homosexuality. So for those of you that don't know London very well, so that's interesting, Graham. And why do you think you ended up there? I mean, what do you think is the main life lesson and the main reason for you ending up outside the Admiral Duncan watching the bombing?
I think that it was, I think I don't really necessarily feel that I need to subscribe to a really complex sort of meaning behind it.
Okay.
I think in some ways it was as simple as it was my home city that I have deep links to. My father is also from London. My mother is also from London. So there's their parents as well. So there's a long line of sort of history with London with me. And I was very, at that time, I think I would have said that I was never going to leave at any point, kind of thing, you know.
Yeah.
I was very very proud in a way of my kind of London roots, I guess.
Yeah. I understand that. I'm married to a Londoner, by the way, and he didn't want to move back to the USA. He's like, no, I'm not ever leaving London. And I said, okay, well, I'm leaving you. And I forced him over here. I forced him back, but he doesn't regret it now, because London has changed significantly. Now, let me ask you this. Did you ever see the 7/7 bombings in London, or did you ever travel back in time to look at the because London has been bombed multiple times. So have you ever seen
London's always been bombed.
Yeah,
it's a part of its history.
Yeah, exactly.
Because when I was growing up, it was the IRA bombings.
Yeah.
So it's sort of.
I was just about to ask you, did you ever see the IRA bombings? Did you ever see the 7/7 bombers?
Well,
I mean, because I worked that incident, the 7/7.
Yeah, I was gonna get to that. I also
great.
had a precognitive experience also with the blue-gray quality of the 7/7 bombing as well. So I think one of my theories of what might be the reason is because of this link with London. So I had, you know, these were the two major bombings within 6 years of each other, basically. And I had experiences of both of them. So I think that possibly that's, you know, that was the link. But I also think, like I was mentioning just now, that whole thing of it also led me on a kind of spiritual journey, thinking a lot more about non-violence and basically the golden rule, and trying to sort of understand and experience other people as I would myself. So that was very much a part of the outcome of those visions or those experiences or out-of-body experiences or whatever. They led me on that lesson. I don't necessarily think that that's why I had the experiences. I don't hugely subscribe to this idea that everything is for a reason. But, you know, and I don't think we're just here to learn and all that kind of stuff. I think that's actually quite a toxic idea. But I think that the way I look at it is basically that you can learn out of any situation. And so I did grow and learn out of those experiences.
Wow, that's amazing, Graham. That is really amazing. appreciate you being honest and sharing that experience with us. I can honestly tell you, unfortunately, the person's not here to confirm it, but 2 years before the 7/7 bombings, I had a premonition, and I put warnings out to my close circle of friends. But so I think that there's an overspill of mediumship in what you do, or in precog in what you do. That's very interesting. So what are some of the most interesting places that can you just travel to anywhere you want to go now? I mean, can you just see anything you want to see?
It's more of a, like with anything, you have peak experiences and you have more mundane everyday experiences. The ones we've just talked about, I would say I would consider like peak experiences. They're the really, really powerful ones. But the way I tend to work these days is I tend to go with the experience and see where it takes me and what unfolds naturally. When I try to control it too much, it can sometimes reduce the strength of the experience, or it can or it can cancel the experience out altogether. So I try to sort of allow the experience to unfold. But I do when I'm doing scientific research and things like that, I've obviously had to try and focus in on particular sort of targets and things like that. So that's
okay. So let me ask you this, because, in the remote viewing world, and I know there's questions in the chat, the other Graham, Dagmo, thank you for letting me know. I'm trying to do this by myself today. Craig has got some family commitments, but so do you ever combine? So this is the way I look at it, right? Because I know that mixing modalities in the remote viewing world is a very difficult concept for people to grasp. I mix modalities all the time, and I find it to be more powerful. So if you were to target a place where you wanted to go, say you wanted to come and stand in my front yard tonight, which would be incredibly boring, I'm sorry, but it's the only example I can think of. Say you wanted to come stand in my front yard tonight, would you use a combination of the remote viewing to set up the framework and then use that to travel to the target area? I mean, how do you do that?
Yeah, well, when for example, a couple of years ago, I did a study with the Ryan Research Center, so in the US, where we did 14 weeks of targets, and I used a combination of I experimented with a few different things. I used OBE techniques, I used remote viewing techniques, I used Ganzfeld. So I used basically perceptual deprivation, sort of similar to sensory deprivation, so mild sensory deprivation, to try and go deeper into a trance state in order to facilitate better psychic perceptions. So I used a combination of factors, and some of the targets were less successful, some were more successful. So, but overall, we got a statistically significant result. So the experiment was a success. But yeah, I do mix things. I don't see any major problem with mixing modalities or approaches. I think it can be a useful thing. I mean, especially, well, I guess with the early stages of remote viewing using an ideogram and those kind of more unconscious connections to a particular target can be done in a kind of more remote viewing context. But then when you maybe get further along with the target and you're starting to create more of a full visual picture of the target, then in that context you might then move on to trying to use out of body elements. But I do want to emphasize that I don't think anyone can do these things on the push of a button when it comes to like OBEs. I mean, that's been one of the hardships of doing research on this area, because I am literally the only out of body author who takes part in scientific research and puts myself on the line. So
yes, I think that's you were recommended for this, and I heard from multiple people. They're like, you can't go to anybody else, you have to go to Graham. So there's a couple of questions here in the chat. I'm sorry if it deviates a bit from the track you're going on, but Denny has a question, which is she wants to know what is actually happening during astral projection. Is it your soul, or is it a casual body, or which level? What leaves your body? Can you give us an idea of what that is?
Again, the way I tend to approach things is more scientific. So I don't really subscribe to the old theosophical model, which is like multiple bodies. I think that we have to sort of go to the evidence, and we have to look at, okay, so what actually seems to be going on when someone has these kinds of experiences, and do we have evidence for a body and things like that. So when we look at the research, it doesn't seem to support. There are a few vague bits of research that suggest there might be some kind of energy body, but the vast majority of research suggests that it's more an extension of consciousness, or a shifting of consciousness away from the physical body. So we're dealing with something more like, there's some of the models, like for example, there's the physicist Brian Josephson put forward an idea that if, let's say for example, you've probably heard of entanglement, the idea of so two photons, for example, can be entangled over any distance, and they will basically react in the same way at a vast distance. It can be any distance whatsoever. So Brian Josephson has put forward this idea that possibly the cells of the brain, or very, very low level structures of the brain, for example, or even the electrical activity of the brain, could be entangled in some way. So if that was the case, you would have some kind of replica of your consciousness, or replica of your perceptions could happen at a distance. So you could then have perceptions at a distance. There is also, Sir Roger Penrose put forward this idea of the microtubules, which are low level cells.
Sorry, hang on. Craig, can you, oh, he muted himself. Sorry. Thank you. Carry on. I'm sorry.
So in these microtubules, you could then basically have the same thing. You could have like entanglement. So if this is the case, I mean, I think we still have a lot of work to do to work out exactly what's going on. But I think roughly what's going on, I think, is that we're experiencing some kind of extension of consciousness, or extension of the mind beyond the bounds of the physical body. So I think we often experience a body in and out of body experience initially. Often it diminishes over time, but we often experience it initially because we identify ourselves in that way. We think of ourselves as a body. So we have a body schema, if you like. We have this kind of construct, this map of ourselves as a body. But actually, when you look at, again, the research, if you look at the work of Carlos Alvaredo, for example, who's probably the leading scientist in the world on out-of-body experiences, he's shown that the vast majority of people don't actually experience a body when they have an out-of-body experience. They experience more of themselves as a ball of energy, like a sphere. They experience themselves simply as a traveling consciousness. So there's a whole range of things. So it's only about 40% of people experience a body, and depends on what research you look at, but some it's less. So a lot of the more esoteric beliefs from theosophy, like astral bodies, etheric bodies, all of that kind of thing, doesn't seem to be supported by what people actually experience, and also what the science is sort of showing us. So I think we're moving away from that sort of old-fashioned model, and we're moving towards something that's more consciousness based in terms of what might be going on.
Gosh, you are just so full of knowledge. I mean, wow, this is amazing. And again, I just want to thank you for being here today. This is wonderful. Now, I know
You're
Ben
welcome.
has a question, but I want to ask you this, just so that everybody is aware. Are you still teaching classes on how to do this, the outer body experience?
Yeah, sure. I have an online course, which is in video lecture format. So there's, which goes into the science, goes into the techniques, goes into the full range basically. And then I also do private tuition for people who want to go a bit deeper. One of the options with the course is even to do the course and then have an hour Q&A with me afterwards to go over any of the points that people have questions on from the course. So
Wow.
So there's a few options for how I teach, and that's what I'm doing in the COVID era. I do usually do workshops and things as well, but obviously that's not possible at the moment.
Yeah. What is amazing about the whole COVID experience is that for me, because I'm not in London, and I know that a lot of things go on in London. There's a lot of workshops at the College of Psychic Studies. Have you ever taught at the College of Psychic Studies, by the way?
I haven't, no, not there particularly. But like I say, I lived abroad for nearly a decade, so I haven't actually been in London for the last, last decade.
Yeah. So. Well, yeah, and it's become more violent now. So I mean, it's amazing that people like me are and everybody now are able to access these courses, which were otherwise, done in person. So you do have a video course, so people all around the world can get into your course and really learn. How long is the course?
Oh, it's there's a lot of material. It's over 10 hours of classes, something like that. And then there's resources and things as well. So yeah.
Wow. Okay, fantastic. Ben, I believe you have a question. Thank you.
Yeah, well, you kind of beat me to the punch with it there. What the hell's going on?
Was that about the courses or?
Yeah, it was.
And your books, Graham, that you've written, how many books have you written? And can we actually learn how to do outer body experiences with your books as well?
Yeah, so I've written, my first book is called Avenues of the Human Spirit, and Avenues of the Human Spirit is basically my own story, my personal journey up, the first sort of 20 years or so of my exploration with all of this. And then I wrote Navigating the Outer Body Experience, and that book is all about the techniques and the methods and the science and all of that. So that goes well with the course. It's a good sort of manual for all of that. And actually, I'm currently working on, there's going to be a 10th anniversary version of that coming out later this year or early next year. So yeah, that's going to be exciting too.
Wonderful. Ben, are you still there? Do you still have a question?
Yeah. Well, you kind of beat me to the punch with it there. I was going to ask about the course. I see you have a course called the Navigator Course, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Monroe Institute, but I was wondering how that may differ from, say, the Gateway program, and the same with the liminal audio.
Infraliminal, yeah.
Infraliminal, that's the one.
It comes from infrasound and subliminals, so it's a mixture of those two things.
Okay. I was wondering how
it's very different.
Is that similar to Hemisync at all?
No, a lot of people make that mistake or confuse the two, but actually I developed infraliminal sound because I didn't find much success with binaural beats. So I decided to explore ways to work with sound that didn't use binaural beats and that kind of just worked with frequencies in different ways. So then I looked into infrasound, which is very low level sound, and then I also looked into subliminals, and I found basically an approach that would consistently induce the vibrational state, which the vibrational state is the state for most people is the pre-state to the outer body experience. So it's the way that you can launch the outer body experience. So I developed the sound technology to do that. So it's very different to Hemisync or to binaural beats. It's more of a more of a multi-leveled approach. And then
Okay.
the course is, well, the course is sort of teaching you all of the information that you need. So it's, and it goes into models of consciousness, what our consciousness might be, because obviously, as I was just mentioning, I think consciousness is very key to our understanding of what might be going on with the out-of-body experience. So I explore models of consciousness and also my own theory and model of consciousness that includes the out-of-body experience, which I call the mass model. So I've got, and I also go into what I call independent consciousness experiences, which is sort of like my new term for an out-of-body experience, because I'm trying to kind of focus more on the objective experiences and also get away from this idea of something coming out of the body in a sort of spirit form, because I think we need to kind of think more about it in terms of consciousness rather than in terms of spirits. And then by doing that, actually, we can bring in remote viewing and things like that as well, because then you start to think of it like a continuum. So when we're perceiving something in a remote viewing session, that's a part of non-local consciousness. That's a part of us perceiving something non-locally with our own minds. And then when we go into an out-of-body experience, that just moves us along that continuum where we go into a full multi-sensory experience of the world. So it's really they're interconnected things. I think all of the psychic abilities are all essentially interconnected.
That is very interesting. Man, these guys they ask some great questions. Thank you for that, Ben. Do you have any other questions at the moment?
I have a lot of questions, but I'll wait my turn.
Oh, okay. I know you would, Ben. Ben's great. So Craig, he wanted to know, and I don't understand this, but let me ask you, because you'll probably understand. He wants to know about the theorized mechanism for astral projection. Does that make sense? What he's asking?
Sorry, I'm listening. He actually kind of answered it, but I would love if you elaborated a little bit more and spoke a little bit more about it. He mentioned that there's a theory with quantitative entanglement, and the electrons in the brain can somehow be mirrored elsewhere in the universe. And I really like that explanation, but is there anything else that you can offer in terms of other theories? And then also, since I'm shooting questions at you, what would you say to a skeptic if someone had just approached the topic and didn't have any belief in it or understanding? Like what would you be able to offer in terms of an explanation to prove that it's a real phenomenon?
Well, with skeptics, I just say, look at the science. That's simple. They just never have. I've debated prominent skeptics like Susan Blackmore. If you're interested in that, we can, on my website, there's a link to my debate with her. She's probably the leading skeptic on out-of-body experiences, and I kind of address all of her claims in there. And I wrote an article that goes in depth to the science behind my statements in the debate, where I kind of explain what science I'm referencing and the experiments that I've done and things like that. I think most professional skeptics kind of just look for any loophole they can in any piece of research so they can kind of throw it out. It's a bit like creationists or something. They just look for something they can throw out, the whole of the research with, and it's not really very reasonable or fair usually.
No, and I would say you're probably, listen, when I first started out, people were, I don't believe it. And I would entertain those people. I just don't even entertain them anymore. I'm just like, well, this is my journey. That's your journey. You can either choose to enlighten yourself or you can choose not to. I don't even entertain those. Do you still entertain the skeptics or no?
I feel like I can. So I do, because there's no other, again, it's sort of, when it comes to the science, most of the out-of-body experience authors just ignore skepticism and ignore sort of the people coming from the science angle. And I made a conscious decision that I wanted to be a part of science and that I wanted to take a scientific approach, because ultimately I want to move the field forward and I want to find out what's really going on, not just base things on what people were saying 200 years ago or something. So I felt that I want to work with people like Dean Radin and Rupert Sheldrake and the Rhine Research Centre, so I've worked with all those people because I want to understand more about what the experience is, but also to create more evidence to address the skeptical claims. So yeah, I've debated quite a few skeptics over the years, and I've also been to James Randi's events a couple of times when he was alive, and I addressed him directly on his claims about Rupert Sheldrake, who I'd worked with, and I've just found a high degree of dishonesty with it all, that they will kind of exaggerate and not be like honest about the research that they've done and things like that. So yeah, I think when it comes to skeptics, if I feel that they're willing to listen and that they're open-minded, I will go through, well, this is, for example, I think the remote viewing research is great, for example, to show that perception can perceive things at a distance. We also then have some OBE research that suggests that the same thing can happen with a traveling consciousness or whatever is going on. It could be a body. I don't discount that possibility, but I'm just saying that I think the evidence leans more towards other things. But so we have evidence that suggests that too. And then we have things like the micro PK research that Dean Radin has done, and I took part in that as well. And that shows that physical reality can be impacted by psychic ability. So I was literally put into a metal steel box, which was basically a Faraday cage.
Yes.
And then I had to perceive and influence an interferometer, which is basically a device that fires photons and creates the interference pattern from the famous double slit experiment that you've probably heard of, to do with quantum mechanics. So yeah, I've been involved with all these experiments directly. So
sorry, can I just ask you, when you were inside the Faraday cage, were you able to travel with your consciousness? What were you restricted? What happened there?
Yeah, it didn't make any difference to my actually, if anything, I was sort of struggling not to go into an out of body experience because I was trying to impact the interferometer, the photons firing, because that was the point of the experiment. I had to try and psychically manipulate the photons, but while I was doing this, I think it was something to do with the level of concentration, but I was going into the vibrational state really, really intensely. So I was actually sort of having to hold myself back from having an out-of-body experience. And what happened was I generated this crazy amount of heat, which was also, so when they opened the Faraday cage, she was the research woman that was sort of assisting Dean Radin was really amazed, because she said it was like a sauna. She just, like, this heat just came out, and she said she'd never seen that before. And I was sweating, I was exhausted. She said usually people are just sitting there half asleep, and she said she opened the door for me and it was almost like there'd been a furnace in there or something. So yeah.
That's really funny. Because before I do some CTT work, and without going into it, we traditionally, George Duisman, who created the CTT, traditionally would always do a round before we started, which was we've surrounded ourselves with a golden Faraday cage in order to protect ourselves from any, when we do negative energy removals, so that negative energy didn't come back. But because I was really the first psychic he was working with, I'm like, George, that's not working. I can feel that negative energy. It's coming back. And not only is it coming back, it's wrapping itself around my neck. So we had to change that. So that's very interesting that you sat in an actual Faraday cage and you were still able to penetrate beyond that. That's amazing. Now, Julie, Julie has a question. Does Graham have any thoughts about past life, reincarnations, or anything of that sort? I mean, what do you think? Have you ever OBE'd to a past life?
I've gone back in time in out of body experiences, but just to answer the question more specifically, I think there's very strong evidence for past life memories, especially in children. I knew and worked with Erlander Haraldsson, who is the Icelandic researcher who assisted Ian Stevenson, who many of you will know. Ian Stevenson was the main researcher into past life memory, especially in children. So a lot of the research that we have on reincarnation and those topics comes from Ian Stevenson. And now we have Jim Tucker, who has sort of continued the work that Ian Stevenson and Erlander Haraldsson did in the past. But I knew Erlander personally, and so he went through a lot of the research with me. I met him a few times. We kind of, before he died this year, actually, sadly. So, but before that, he kind of went through a lot of the research with me, and we spoke at conferences together and things. So I think the evidence for that area is very, very strong. And I think the interesting thing with reincarnation, or at least past life memories, is that the children that report them often report having died in an unexpected way in the previous life. So that seems to be a key factor in reincarnation cases. So like an accident or a murder or something like that, it's almost like they come back because they have unfinished business to some degree.
Yeah, well, sorry, can I just add something to that, and tell me if I'm getting on your nerves? I won't be offended. Absolutely. Seriously, I'm like, but I'm British as well, by the way, Graham. I grew up in the States, but everybody in my family is English, everybody, including me as well. But so with that, yes, you are absolutely right. From birth, when I was around other children, when I was, a baby, I know that babies can all telepathically communicate to one another. And they also have that intuition to telepathically perceive what the parents or the guardian figure is thinking. Now that tends to fade away after 18 months, but it never faded away with me, obviously. The other thing is, I clearly remember all my past lives when I was a very, very young child, but then there's a shift in consciousness. And I would say it's probably around the age of 5 or 6. And I don't know what, I would be interested to know what age you think it is, whereby those memories tend to get locked away, and you push forward with your life. I mean, what do you think about that? What age do you find that the children can actually make contact with their past lives?
Well, yeah, they start to describe things pretty much as soon as they can communicate. In terms of when it goes, it does seem to be around 5, 6, that kind of age, but sometimes a little bit later. But that's according to the science, consistently that seems to be around the age that they start to lose awareness of some of the memories. Some of my own research, I've spoken to children that have had pre-birth out-of-body experiences, which is a pretty amazing thing. So they've had OBEs while in the womb, and things like that. So but interestingly, there's one case that for the new edition of my book, I'm thinking to reconnect with the boy. Now he's sort of 10 years older, and see how his thoughts and memories of the experience have changed.
I'm sorry, John, can you mute yourself? There's somebody making noise, or maybe it's Martin. I'm sorry, if you guys could
I'm sorry, maybe it's me.
That's okay, thank you. Now let me ask you this, Graham, and I'm sorry, I know everybody's probably getting upset with me because I'm asking a lot of questions, but I'm basing this upon my own experiences. When you discovered that in utero or in the womb, that a child has experienced an outer body experience. How did you find that out?
Well, in that particular case, the situation was basically the father reached out to me, and he told me that basically his son had started asking questions about things that happened before he was born. One of the questions was, why was his mother upset when she found out, or why did she cry when she found out that he was a boy, that time in the room with the television screen, and this is how the boy described it. And the father said, what do you mean? And the boy explained a bit more, and the father realized that he was describing something that happened during the mother's scan during her pregnancy. And she'd welled up and started crying when they said that it was going to be a boy, because she was just happy. And he described this entire scene correctly, and even described that the father had facial hair at the time, which he didn't usually, and the boy had never seen him with a beard. So he described all of these things when he was very young, like basically as soon as he could speak. And so the father reached out to me with the case, and then I interviewed the boy with the father there, and interviewed him about all the details of what he saw. And he was quite confused by why anyone would even be interested in it. I think he was about about 6 when I interviewed him, and he was very, very kind of confused by it all.
Yeah, that's and I can confirm that. So that's kind of one of my little specialties that I can do, which is I can telecommunicate, telepathy with unborn children. And I actually did that experiment. I just had a baby a year ago. I actually did that experiment with my own child when I was pregnant, and I thought, I wonder how this is going to play out. And I would communicate with him. Are you okay in there? It was very limited communication. Obviously that expansion of language wasn't there, but he could clearly communicate his feelings. Now, I can tell you this about my child, and I don't know how to quantify this, but when this baby was born, he was so far advanced. Like, my child started cruising the furniture at 5 months old. He's standing up, cruising the furniture, almost unheard of. He started walking unaided at 9 months, and he just seems really advanced. And I'm wondering if that communication between us when I was pregnant contributed to that. That's very interesting. He's also very psychic as well. But so I can confirm to you that children can communicate. They do know what's going on when they are in the womb. Very perceptive. The fact that soul would have left the body and seen that what was going on in the room, that's a new one to me, and I'm actually thinking I'm going to do a session on that. So that's absolutely amazing. Wow.
There's very few examples of that in the literature. So that's one of the reasons that I'm interested in it, because I reached out to a colleague at the Society for Psychical Research in London to ask if they'd come across any cases of pre-birth out-of-body experiences, and we managed to track down maybe 2 or 3 possible examples in 140 years or so. So it's a very, very rare type of experience.
If you believe in what I can do, and just in future, if you do another project like this and you have a sample of pregnant ladies, it doesn't even have to be pregnant ladies, it can be animals, because you can communicate with anything. Let me know, and I can actually physically go in and ask the unborn children if they have left their body. Now, hopefully I can describe it in a way and see what experiences they have, and then you can follow them later on in life and ask them if they recall these experiences. That's just one idea that I have. So we've got loads of questions here, Graham. You are just such an interesting person. Dermot, my mate in Ireland, he wants to know if you have to protect your body, your consciousness, or do any grounding or protection work when you do your OBE, and can you rule out some other entity interfering? I mean, is that possible?
I tend to think, do what feels comfortable and, what you feel right about with yourself. I think this is an area where maybe it comes into belief systems and things like that. If you happen to believe in negative entities and things like that, then I think you should probably, do some kind of protection or purification or whatever that feels right for you. I generally think grounding is a good idea. It definitely helps to kind of ground yourself after an experience. I mean, that's just sort of common sense, I would say. I think with most things like that. But I think when it comes to sort of talk about other levels and entities and things like that, I think there's so many opinions and so many beliefs out there that I think everyone needs to sort of investigate that for themselves, really. It's a very difficult thing, because one person who's more from a sort of more Christian perspective will be very strong on sort of good and evil and things like that, and then someone who's maybe more Eastern might look at it more as like karma or something like that, and then someone who's more scientific might not see it at all as an issue. So it's a tricky one, I think.
What do you do to ground yourself after an OBE?
I do a lot of different sort of practices. I try to mix things up. I don't believe in habitual spiritual practice, which is also quite unusual and controversial, I guess. But I tend to do just simply like putting my hands on the ground and sort of putting any excess energy into the ground, and just sort of giving myself a moment, just sort of stabilize myself and that kind of thing. But it feels very natural for me. I don't feel like I need to do huge amounts of grounding, because I feel very fluid and comfortable with the experiences over the years, and I think I'm quite a grounded person anyway, so it's not like a huge thing that I worry about too much.
I think your ecological lifestyle contributes to your grounding. So have you ever met anyone on the astral plane? I mean, have you ever like gone out there and say, oh, hello? Has that ever happened? What do you do out there?
I have encountered lots of different people. There's been situations where I've really wished that I could track the person down. Sometimes I've had experiences, obviously, where I've met people that I actually know. Again, they tend to be peak experiences, and they're not something that happens every day. And then there's also situations where I've been seen by someone else, but again, not a common occurrence, but it does happen. And people that I've worked with, students as well, have described to me that they've had similar encounters. One of the most interesting actually was one of my students met his young son while having an out-of-body experience, and it was his son. I think his son was about 10, and it was his son's first ever out-of-body experience, and they met each other in the kitchen of their house, and saw each other as shadow figures, which is quite common. You see each other as a sort of looking like a shadow, basically.
Wow. So maybe, okay, this brings about another question. I don't know if you're able to answer it. So, lots of us experience like seeing different shadows out of the corner of our eye. I always thought those to be spiritual experiences, but I mean, could somebody who is not on the astral plane, who like me is sitting in my workroom and I look at the corner of my eye and I see a shadow, could that possibly be somebody like astral traveling, OBE?
Well, it could possibly, but it could also be possibly a lot of different things. But yeah, it could possibly be that. Yeah, I mean, like I said, the situations where I've been out of body. gone to a particular location in the out of body experience, someone that I know has been at that location, and then they've said to me, did you have an OBE to this location, because I think I saw a figure, like a shadowy figure. So we kind of were able to sort of confirm it to some degree like that. Obviously it's still not absolutely certain, but it's interesting when things like that happen. And then there was another of my students who that's interesting in terms of the skeptic thing as well, because her boyfriend is quite skeptical, but she had an out of body experience, went to her boyfriend's house, and sat on the end of his bed in the out of body experience, and he saw her, and he saw her as if she was physically sitting there, and he saw all the clothes she was wearing, like everything, like as if she was literally like projected the image, or the, you know, the whole thing of what she was wearing and who she was and everything on that day. So he saw her, looked at her, was surprised, said, "What are you doing here?" And then she disappeared. But then he phoned her up and described what he saw, and it was exactly correct to what she was wearing and everything.
Goodness.
The fascinating end part to that story is he remains a skeptic.
Oh no. Well, there's no hope. There's no hope.
There's no hope. No.
Sorry, you know, moving on.
Can I hop in with a question?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Possible. I think there was a couple more in the chat. I think Martin and Julia got one as well. But
yeah.
When you I sort of watched an interview with you on the Bob Olson, and you explained living beings as like nodes of information in a greater complex sort of thing. I was just wondering if you could sort of go into depth with that a bit more.
Oh, okay. That's sort of, I do see things in terms of interconnectedness. I do think that everything, all life, all consciousness, etc. I think a good way of thinking about it is a kind of web of consciousness or information or perception or awareness, however you want to see it. So I think this actually relates to a question earlier as well that we didn't get to, where someone was saying like, how do we sort of see this whole thing as working and whatever. And I think what other models are there? But I think another common idea, especially within near-death experience literature, for example, is the idea that the human brain is more like a filter for consciousness. So instead of consciousness arising from the brain, consciousness is received into the brain, and the brain filters it. So it would be something akin to how a television translates the signal into pictures and images and sound, etc. So that's quite a popular idea within the near-death experience literature and writers and researchers in that area. If you look at it like that, so then the idea of an out-of-body experience, which is also a part of a near-death experience, are obviously sort of interconnected experiences. Basically, what that suggests is that when you have a cardiac arrest and when you go into a near-death experience, it's essentially the filter has been taken away. The brain is no longer active. So there's no longer this filtering of consciousness. So suddenly you're able to perceive anything at any location, you know, your awareness expands out. So if we start to think of it in those kinds of terms, then in order to have an out-of-body experience or to go into those kinds of things, it's almost like we need to shut down the ordinary senses, the ordinary activity of the body and the mind. We need to sort of shut all of that down as much as possible. So that's why deep relaxation or sensory deprivation and things like this can be very helpful to out-of-body experiences, because by shutting all of that down, we then allow this bigger consciousness, this more expanded consciousness to come to the fore, and then we can experience the full potential of who we are in terms of as conscious beings. So in that sense, that idea of being a node is almost like you're a center of consciousness, a kind of focal point of consciousness within this bigger ocean of consciousness, if you like. So once you release your consciousness from the confines of normal bounds of the physical body, etc., you can perceive in any way possible. I think this is why in meditation, for example, people talk about enlightenment, because it's almost like when all of the baggage and all of the things that define you in terms of being a human are let go of within the meditational process, then you reach this same kind of point where you experience a huge expanse of consciousness. But I just think, the out of body experience is a more direct, more effective way of doing it in many ways.
Gosh, you
Thank
are
you.
incredible. You are incredible. Julie has another question. She's a fantastic. All of these guys are amazing today. She wants to know if you've ever worked with Tim Weider. He's an amazing sound healer and teaches sound healing, and he's also played for the Dalai Lama. Do you know who Tim Weider is?
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with him.
Okay.
No.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Martin has a question.
Yeah,
Martin,
can I
yeah,
jump?
are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, so my question is that when I had my first OOBE, I thought like it's gonna be, it will feel like I'm enlightened, like all the possibilities will open up for me and stuff like that. But when it actually happened the first time, I was like moving very slowly, and it's very easy to like it blends to a dream, if you know what I mean. Like it's not very clear. And from all the books and stuff that I read, some people say that it's about affirmation, like to say awareness now or stuff like that, or that you should practice awareness during your daily life.
Were you
And
doing it from a lucid dream?
well, I was aware of like leaving my body, but then
But
like
did you use a technique that starts from a dream state?
well, usually it would be like I would meditate, right? I would feel the vibrations, and there would be a point of time where I could like lose my consciousness or something, and then
Okay.
I would feel the vibrations, and then I would either like roll out of the body or just increase the vibrations, and I would appear out of the bed. But sometimes even the room would have like another window, or I would appear in totally somewhere made up place. It's not like, like 100% real, but just astral. Like I'm not aware of any frequencies or the astral levels or where I am exactly.
I think to me it sounds like just a matter of kind of working with it more. I think early on things can be more groggy and kind of slow. I mean, in my very first out of body experience, it was almost like there was a pole running through my body. I could only rotate side to side. I couldn't even move at all other than that, just rotating. And I think often the early experiences, you've got to look at it almost like, sorry, you've got to look at it like your body is unable to sort of move or function in a usual kind of way when you're very unused to using it. It's almost like when you're learning to do something for the first time, you can be very stiff and kind of, but then it becomes more and more fluid and more natural and more kind of
Yeah,
expansive
man.
as time goes on. So I think it's just a lot of the
Yeah,
time it's just a practice, really.
okay. Yeah, I mean, I had like about 20 those experiences, and then I would be flying, but then I couldn't fly more. Like everything seems very limited. And then, like my question is like, how to increase the awareness, or if it's just about practicing the astral travel, or if it's all connected and it depends what I'm doing in my daily life, or
I think it does depend what you do in your everyday life very much. I mean, it's a bit too much to get into here, but I think it's very much about what you do in your everyday life. That's, I think, what a lot of people miss with this work. They just do the techniques, but then the rest of the day they're thinking about other things, or they're watching TV or doing normal everyday kind of
right.
things and whatever, and then they just focus on the techniques. So I tend to emphasize that I think it's very important to get your physiology right. That's why diet and things like that is important. It's important to work on daily practice of some description, different things. It could be remote viewing, could be meditation. There's a whole range of elements that you can bring in. It's best to, instead of looking at a one size fits all kind of approach, I'm really one who believes in finding the things that work best for you as an individual as well. So
Wow. That's amazing. Thank you. Julie has another question. Julie, I don't know if you're able to elaborate for us. I see telepathic links fade away or subdued by society. Are you able to elaborate, please?
Yes, yeah. I'm just wondering if you sort of have looked into things that when children are born, you've said they've got loads of sort of attributes that they appreciate, but I'm really sure that we as society close it down. So I wondered if you've done any research in that area, and also how can we actually help to get that message out there to help people to not have to close it down.
It really depends on the child, I think. It's sort of
on the child or the parents.
I think more the child.
Yeah.
My parents were very ordinary working class people. My dad was a dustman. My mum was a home help. They weren't interested in anything like this even remotely. So yeah, I don't think it was sort of related really to how they behaved and whatever. But I think certain types of children will just always kind of have these attributes and continue with them, and other types of children less so. I think maybe it is a lot to do with conformity, like we were sort of talking about right at the beginning. Savant children and autistic children are often better at psychic trials, for example. So it seems, and that continues as they get older. So because if they're that way aligned, it seems that they do continue with their abilities, whereas maybe other children will sort of change and adapt. I don't necessarily think it's all about kind of societal attitudes, but that can be a factor as well, for sure. But I think the good news is there are a lot of children that become adults that are still very passionate about these things and do continue with these things. I haven't done specific research with children because it's not really an area that I work with. I mainly 99% work with adults, but on occasion someone who has an interesting child will reach out to me, but I don't really go out there looking for them. It was more the people I know, other researchers like Ian Stevenson and Erlander Hodson and people like that, who've gone out and sort of worked specifically with children. So
with your family background, who were you actually looked after by, and actually would that have given you more space to not be subdued the same?
I was mainly looked after by my mother and father, but occasionally by a woman from Cuba who was of Jamaican descent. She was like my mother's closest friend, and she was sort of, I called her my auntie. She was sort of seen as like a member of the family, really. But yeah, other than that, it was just my mother and father.
Yeah, but perhaps because they were so busy, they didn't actually subdue you. And also quite often people in those occupations are actually quite dyslexic and more open and not as sort of having to be in such conforming writing down jobs type thing.
Okay, I don't think they were hugely busy. I don't remember saying that, but yeah, they gave me a lot of energy and stuff. I mean, maybe this is true, but I always try to be careful on sort of maybe blaming sort of society and saying that things were always better in the past. I mean, for example, I think in the technological age, it seems that children are becoming more psychic, not less.
I'm not saying people were better. But what I'm saying is that perhaps you didn't have it subdued the same because you were given more space because of that. And I know, having worked with dyslexia and specific learning difficulties and the way society is, those people tend to have been either closed down or they just sort of switch off from that part of society, so that those abilities can actually thrive more. So perhaps because of your parents, you were allowed to thrive more in those areas.
Can I just jump in there and ask a question? Graham, do you have any form of dyslexia at all?
Yeah, I would say I'm
Yeah.
dyslexic. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Julie. And the reason I'm jumping in here is because most of the mediums, psychic mediums I know, all suffer from anything from mild dyslexia to like massive dyslexia, myself included. So definitely that is an interesting point, and I believe that has to do, I think personally, the brain of the child is wired, up differently. So if you are a natural psychic medium, your brain is wired completely differently, and for some reason that it has a dyslexia or dyslexic component to it. I don't know why, but I have found that with most of the psychic mediums I've come across.
I'm a big advocate of the whole concept of neurodiversity, that these are not necessarily disorders as such. These are basically just differences in the way that people's brains work and how they function in the world. And I think that there are people who maybe the way that their psychology or their physiology works is just aligned a bit different, and that can lead to greater abilities with OBEs, etc., and any psychic ability.
Wow, that I like that, neurodiversity. That's an amazing term. I like that. That's very true. Wow.
Yeah.
I forgot who's next, guys. Craig normally monitors these chats. Is it Ben who's next?
There's someone before me. Is there? Maybe.
I think Martin's been, Julie's been. I think it's you, and then Denny.
Oh, okay. Well, again, on the Bob Olsen interview that I watched, you described an experience where you kind of became the consciousness of a flower. And I was wondering, do you think that's possible with, say, any object or item or living beings, or have you had any other experiences like that?
I've had other similar experiences with a small animal, for example. I had an experience where I seemed to experience the kind of life cycle of the animal. But that particular experience happened quite early in my OBEs.
Really fascinated me when I heard that.
Yeah, it was in the New Forest, and we'd traveled to the New Forest. We'd just gone for a day, so we'd gone there and come back all in one day from London. So I was pretty exhausted, and I had an out-of-body experience spontaneously just because I was exhausted, really. And that then I came down over the trees, through the canopy of the forest, and down, and there was this flower, and I just sort of focused on it, and then it was like my consciousness just kind of went into it. But I guess this is one of the things that's given me that idea that everything is sort of interconnected, because then I literally perceived the sustenance from the light going into it, the sustenance from the soil and from the water moving up the stem. I literally experienced every sort of element of its existence, and saw that flower not necessarily as a singular thing, but that flower as a part of an interconnected system, which is how I'd also perceived my own consciousness and experiences as well. And then with the small animal, it was almost like that animal was telepathically connected to all the other animals of its species. So I've had multiple experiences like this that suggest this. Sorry?
Could you control the animal, or was it literally just feeling what it felt at that time?
No, and I couldn't control it. It's a tricky question because I didn't really try to either. It was just like I kind of went with it, and I just sort of saw what happened. But no, I don't think I would have been able to if I tried. It was more
just the
like I was just sharing in it. I was just possibly even tuning into its memories or like the history, almost like psychometry, where you read an object or you read a particular location or something like that. It might have been something akin to that. We don't really know at the end of the day where an experience like that arises from. We can guess, but we don't ultimately know. And I try to sort of be cautious about assuming what's going on and try to be very sort of careful and say, let's keep that as a possibility because maybe we'll discover an even more interesting reason of why that happened, you know.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. Denny would like to know if you could explain more about your infraliminal sound and how can somebody obtain it? And what are the differences between the infraliminal sound and what other modes there are out there? I guess binaural beats is, you briefly touched on binaural beats. I know that I've used binaural beats, but I would be interested in using infraliminal sound. How do we obtain that?
It's available on my website. It can just be downloaded on its own, or it can be purchased with the course. So there's like deals, like packages where you can get the course plus the infraliminal. So there's two different tracks. One is for kind of pre-programming yourself prior to sleep. For example, if you're more of a sleep dreaming person who wants to work in that way, or if you're more of a conscious person and you want to consciously induce an out-body experience, then the vibrational state track, which is infraliminal 1, that's the one that kind of helps to induce the vibrational state. So okay, so yeah, I tried hemisync and binaural beats, and I didn't really, it put me into a nice meditational type feeling, but I didn't really get any further than that with it. But I thought sound makes sense as an avenue to do this. You know, chanting and drumming and things like this have been used for thousands of years as a way to go into a trance state. So it kind of makes sense. But maybe, you know, maybe binaural beats just aren't right for me, was kind of my thinking. So I started to look into other forms of sound that have an impact on consciousness or that have an impact on our state of awareness. And I found out that infrasound or very, very low frequencies can have an impact on our ability to perceive things. People will have ghost-like experiences, visionary type experiences. So I started to research that more. The skeptics were saying this is all just, you know, they're having hallucinations, but then I was finding that people were actually perceiving things accurately while using these low level frequencies, and that the earth resonates on particular frequencies as well. So that was the beginning of the research, and then I looked into subliminals as well, which can also be used as a way. So subliminal is basically like it can be like a message, or it can be a particular command or something like that is put underneath the sound. So the conscious mind is not aware of it, but the unconscious mind is. So with the combination of those two factors of infrasound and the subliminals brought together, and creating a very consistent vibrational pattern, which is based on a 20-minute cycle. So the 20-minute cycles is because most trance states or most hypnotic states, for example, so there's hypnotic suggestion in there as well. So the hypnotic aspects tend to work on a 20-minute cycle. So we built I worked with a psychiatrist to develop it. So we worked creating this sort of 20-minute cycle over time. and then I refined the final stages of it myself on my own, and I developed it into this basically way of getting to the vibrational state. So a lot of it was just literally trial and error. This frequency should have this impact, so let's see what happens when we use this frequency combined with this, and we slowly refined it down to the version that's available today. So that was the journey with it. And it also has other sort of psychological or possibly healing benefits as well. There's a whole article on the website about my journey with it, and about the other sort of positive effects that it seems to have. Like it's been used with people in Ireland with addiction problems. There's a man called Eamon who started working with the sound, and then he started using it with his clients who were people suffering from different forms of addiction, and it helped them to get into a deep meditational state and start to change their lives and get away from their addictions.
Wow. Good grief. You've blown us away today. I tell you really have. You're just an amazing man. Dermot would like to know, how does consciousness attach to the body on or after conception? Can a body function without consciousness at any time in its existence?
I don't feel like I can answer that. I don't think anyone really knows the answer to that question. I think whether consciousness arises from the brain or whether it's received purely into the brain, or the exact combination of whether it's entangled, we really don't know at this point. So I think I think that's an open question. It's a very interesting question. I mean, we don't even fully know what consciousness is yet. Scientifically, we have various models. Some people saying consciousness is an illusion, like Daniel Dennett on one end of the spectrum, through to the models like Sir Roger Penrose that I mentioned, the ORCOR theory, which stands for orchestrated objective reduction, which is basically this idea that these low-level structures of the cells are what consciousness arises from because they're entangled, through to all different types of consciousness. So we really don't know. We don't know how someone has that internal experience that's uniquely theirs. We don't know what that is or where that comes from. So I think it's very hard to even begin to talk about when it starts, when we don't even really know exactly what it is. So
Right.
but that's what's so fascinating to me. I think we've got so much still to discover. We really haven't answered all the questions, and that's amazing.
Well, yeah, and the soul has a consciousness. So if we think about in terms that the soul never dies, then we always have a consciousness. It's just, I guess, maybe trying to figure out when that soul enters the human body. Now, I will tell you that from my own personal experience, I remember coming to this lifetime on the earth plane. I handed a list to somebody in the spirit world. My list was approved. I said goodbye to 2 people or 2 souls. And then I traveled down a tunnel and I landed in my mother's womb. And what is interesting is I actually said, oh, I get to be their daughter this time. So that confirms to me that we do have these soul families and things like that. But I was conscious all the way from the spirit world down the tunnel into my mother's womb. And the fact that children do have a consciousness. Again, you confirm that with your study when the child had that OBE, but also from what I can do, which is the, communicate with the unborn. So I think it's just trying to figure out like how it's attached. I guess maybe it's attached in the soul. Maybe it isn't a brain phenomena. Maybe it's attached to the soul. Who knows? You're right. Who knows? I guess we don't know. And will we ever know? I don't know. Let's see. He's been going for almost 2 hours, guys. Ben, I know you have another question, and then we'll kind of wind it down if that's okay, because this is a long time for somebody. Thank you so much.
That's
Okay, it's only a short one.
Okay.
You mentioned Rupert Sheldrake earlier. I was wondering what sort of research or work you've done with him, because I know he does a lot on morphic resonance. I was wondering if you knew anything about that.
Yeah, sure. I started working with Rupert in 2008, I believe it was. And we started off doing telepathy research. I organized a whole range of experiments. He'd been criticized by skeptics for some of his research being in a location where theoretically the participants could have used a mobile phone or some device in order to cheat, basically. So he said to me that he was interested in finding a location where that would be impossible because there was no signal. So we talked about things like nuclear bunkers, or wartime bunkers and things like this, where mobile phone signals would not work. We eventually found an underground basement in London where there was no signals would get through, and we also used a special device that cancels out any mobile phone signals in the vicinity. And then we arranged a whole load of experiments, just working with people doing telepathy experiments, telephone telepathy experiments specifically, to see if the results would be any different. And basically we got the same results as what he would usually get when he did his ordinary experiments in an ordinary location. So it sort of confirmed basically that it made no difference. The telepathy was still happening and still real. So basically they weren't cheating, which we knew anyway, but it was just to sort of silence the critics, I guess, to some degree, although they don't really pay any attention other than to criticize. But yeah, so that was the first sort of beginning of it with him. Then I worked on some precognitive experiments, and he told me that I got the highest score he'd ever seen in that particular experiment. So that was nice for me to hear. And yeah, so I just sort of worked with him on a few different things and have kept in contact with him. I also went undercover for his Skeptical About Skeptics website. He got me a ticket to James Randi's amazing meeting in London, where there was people like Richard Dawkins and a few other, Susan Blackmore and other major skeptics, Richard Wiseman. And I went and I wrote a report on what they were saying and whether it was sort of valid in terms of their criticisms of psychic abilities, etc. And I didn't find that there was much science there at all. It was mainly just that they didn't like psychic things and therefore they believed they didn't exist. So yeah. So in terms of morphic resonance, yeah, I think that's an interesting theory that Rupert has. I once asked him how he feels about the more quantum-based models, the ones that I've talked about today, in relation to morphic resonance and morphic fields. And he said that his is more of a top-down model and the quantum models are more of a bottom-up. So they kind of, for him, they don't cancel each other out. It's almost like you could say that the quantum models are like Einstein and beyond, and his ideas are more like Newtonian. So that's not to say that his are out of date. It's just to say that his are more on a macro level and the quantum ideas are more on a micro level, but you need both aspects in order for things to function. So they could essentially be interrelated ideas. But he has a lot of evidence to do with how biological systems seem to pick up things from each other. So, for example, he once told me about sheep that were learning to get across cattle grids, and how some sheep in one part of the UK learned to get across the cattle grids, and then sheep all across the country suddenly knew how to do it as well. So this is this idea of morphic fields and how they sort of information can spread across a species or across a social group or across any particular grouping. This information field can spread, and therefore you then have changes in the way things right down from plants up to animals and all different structures, and even social systems can basically be influenced by it. So that's Rupert's basic idea in a quick nutshell. But yeah, I don't know if morphic resonance and morphic fields are how I think it all works, but they're one possibility, and it's what led Rupert to do research into psychic abilities, because he essentially could see that if this is the case, that plants, etc., use fields in order to structure themselves and how they form into their particular shapes and colors, etc., then why not information from human beings, from brains to other brains, etc. So this is where it led him to work with parapsychology.
Good grief. I don't think there's any end to your knowledge ever. Yeah, you must be learning in your OBE travels, because you must travel to like all these libraries and read books in your OBE while you're still asleep. I mean, your knowledge is astounding, absolutely astounding. You can tell that you have dedicated your life to all of this work. Oh my goodness, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now can you just tell everybody, where do we find you, where do we find your books, where do we find your classes? Because I know once this hits YouTube as well and on the Patreon site, and then I'm going to spam everybody on my email list again, they're going to want to know. I mean, this is amazing.
Well, my main website is grahamnicholls.com, and that's Nicholls with 2 L's. And that has contact links, my course, my preliminals, all of that is on there. You can find me on Facebook, just type in my name. Yeah, those are probably the 2 main ones, really. I don't think we need to list all social media. I'm not hugely active on social media and all of that. I'm quite happy to just focus on what I'm doing. So it's kind of I don't spend too much time with all that stuff. So basically Facebook and my website is really the places to go.
Gosh, wow.
And my books you can get them on Amazon or wherever, the usual.
Are they available?
Are they on Audible?
Yeah, Audible. Yeah.
There's no audio versions as yet, no, I'm afraid, but they are. You can get them on Kindle and etc. So.
Okay. And when do you anticipate your new book to be coming out?
Well, it's not a new book. It's just a 10th anniversary version of Navigating the Out of Body Experience. So it will have some new notes and updated sort of information, but it's basically just a new edition for the 10th anniversary of the book. It will come out later this year or the beginning of next year.
You are just incredible. You really are. Do you have any projects for your future OBEs that you want to conquer? I mean, that you would like to share? Anything that you would like to explore when you do an OBE? Are you allowed? So say you wanted to explore some top, I'm sure you've been asked this 1,000 times, top secret, secret, I don't know, bunker or whatever for another country, almost like a spy. Can you spy using OBE?
It's theoretically possible, but I would probably use remote viewing for something like that, because I mean, I've trained in remote viewing and spoken at the International Remote Viewing Association conference and stuff as well. So I do remote view too, and yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. The more, remote viewing is very limited though, compared with what you do, because I mean, do you find that remote viewing is more limited than OBEs? Tell me.
I think they're different. What I would say, they both have advantages and disadvantages. I
Yeah.
mean, what the problem with OBEs is full controllability. So when we've done work in the laboratory, the tricky part with OBEs is, well, if you've got a lab and you go in the lab, you've got to make sure that that OBE will happen when you want it to happen. So that's first problem. Second problem is you want the OBE to be of significant enough quality for the scientific study that you're doing. You know, and then you've got to do that consistently over multiple sessions. So basically, there's pretty much never been anyone who can do that to the consistency that's needed to get really good scientific data. Alex Tannis is one person, for example, who they were doing work with that. Carlis Osis, a Latvian researcher, was working with Erlander Haraldsson, again, the Icelandic scientist I mentioned. They did a bit of work, and Carlis Osis found that they got consistent results to some degree, but to do the OBE work very consistently, it was exhausting for Alex Tannis and the people involved. So that's the tricky thing with OBEs. And then with remote viewing, it's far more controllable, but then the analytical overlay and the brain getting in the way becomes the problem with remote viewing. So it's really what we need is some kind of bringing those two together to get the really best level of evidence. But I also think that ultimately it's going to be those peak experiences. I think what we need to focus on is maybe trying to find a way to identify or predict when the peak experiences will happen. If we can do that, then we're really going to be in an amazing situation. I did also write a free chapter for a free ebook. So if people want to read that, it's called Consciousness Beyond the Body, and it's all different authors, not just me. I wrote one chapter, like chapter 7, I think it is, and in there I go into like what I see as the future for the research and all of that. But if you want to read that, it's completely free. It's an ebook on Amazon, and it's called Consciousness Beyond the Body.
Wow, you are incredible. Well, let's hope that you stay vegan so you're around for many years to enlighten us all.
It's been 15 years now, and I was vegetarian before that, so I think I'm likely to.
Yeah, I work in my real job is I work in medical research, and the vegans always come out with top marks. So definitely stay vegan so you can keep educating us 20, 30, 40 years down the line. I mean, seriously, this is amazing. I really would love for you to come back. I know Ben has probably got pages and pages of questions as well as everybody else, but we've worn you out today. Yeah, see, I knew it. But we've worn you out, love. I mean, you need to get a cup of tea. Oh, you don't take milk in your tea, obviously. So
I use oat milk.
all right. Yeah. So now if you do want to work on that project, where contact me where I can, telepathically communicate with the unborn. And then maybe when they reach about 3 to 5, you can check back in with them, see if they can do any recall with those experiences. I think that would be a good
sure. If I come across if I do come into contact with someone in that category, I will.
Yeah, that would be a good experiment for all those skeptics that I just stay away from. But yeah, definitely. Listen, you guys, contact Graham Nicholls. He has been amazing today. Thank you so very much. This has just blown me away. I'm sure it's blown everybody else away as well. Does anybody have any last minute things they'd like to say?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Does anybody have anything that they would like to say? I mean, seriously, everybody's in the chat saying many thanks. Yeah, Graham, Dagmo, listen, we owe it to you as well for recommending Graham Nicholls. So thank you so much. And just guys, thank you for coming today. Graham, brilliant. I'll give you the YouTube link, and just honestly, this has just been amazing. You've outdone yourself, love. You really have.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you've outdone us all by far. So just keep up the good work, and if you have any workshops or anything coming up, just do you let people know? Or
Yeah, sure. I post them on my website or emailing list or on Facebook. Facebook's probably the best place to keep up with when I do events and stuff, because I tend to post them on there.
Yeah, well, thank you. And thank you everybody for coming, and we appreciate it so much. Everybody have a good day. Thank you, Graham. Take care now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.